Arthur's Family Truth. The knock came at 5:15 in the morning. I had been up for about 25 minutes already. That is how it goes once you pass 60. The body stops asking permission and starts keeping its own schedule. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I had made too strong, watching the pale gray line along the eastern edge of the property slowly pick up color. 340 acres of Blanco County, Texas Hill Country, worth $412,500 the last time anyone put a number on it. My father had watched that same sunrise from this same window. His father before him. The knock was not at the front door. It came from the side door, the one off the kitchen, the one that opens onto the gravel path between the house and the equipment barn. That door was for family. Neighbors and strangers used the front. Whoever was standing on that step at 5:15 in the morning was someone who knew the difference. I set my mug down and crossed the kitchen. When I opened the door, I found Nora standing on the step in a coat she had clearly pulled on over her pajamas. Her hair was loose. Her face had the particular quality of someone who had been awake most of the night working through a decision that had no clean side. She was 29 years old, and in the 3 years she had been married to my nephew Adrian, I had come to think of her the way you think of people who hold things together without making noise about it. She was the one who showed up early. She was the one who remembered what mattered. The kind of person you only fully see when something goes wrong, because that is when you realize things going right had depended on her. "Nora," I said, "what is it?" She looked at me, then at the ground just past my feet, then back at me. I could see her choosing words carefully, the way you choose your footing on ground you cannot fully see. "I need you to do something for me," she said. "And I need you to do it without asking me why." "Not yet." I waited. "Don't go to the bank today. You have that appointment this morning with Mr. Briggs at First State. Cancel it, please." The appointment she was referring to was with Walter Briggs, the loan officer at First State Bank in Johnson City, where my family had kept accounts for longer than I could account for. The meeting had been scheduled as a formality, the final step in an arrangement I had been working through with Adrian for the better part of a year. The plan was straightforward. I was going to transfer a 45% stake in the Hensley property to Adrian, retaining 55% myself, with the understanding that he would take on the day-to-day operations while I stepped back. I was 61. Adrian was 32. He had been working this land beside me for 7 years. His father, my brother Earl, had been dead for 12 years, and in some way I had never put into words to anyone. Making Adrian a partial owner of this place was the closest thing I had to bringing Earl forward into something that had always been ours. "The appointment is just paperwork," I said. "I know what it is," Nora said. "Did something happen? Is Adrian all right?" She pressed her lips together. Her eyes held steady on mine. "I cannot explain right now. I'm asking you to trust me. Don't go to that meeting. I will explain everything by tonight, I promise. Please just stay home today." She left before I could say another word. I stood in the doorway and watched her walk back down the gravel path in the early gray light toward the smaller house 3/10 of a mile to the east, where she and Adrian lived. Then I stepped back inside and stood in my kitchen for a long time without touching my coffee. I want to be honest about what the next 2 hours looked like, because they did not look like clarity. They looked like a man going back and forth between two versions of the same person, neither of which he could fully commit to. The version where Adrian was exactly who I had always understood him to be, and the version that Nora's face at 5:15 in the morning had opened the door to. Adrian had worked beside me through some of the hardest stretches this property had seen. He was here during the dry summer of 2019 that cost us more cattle than I want to count. He was here when my knee went bad and I could not walk the pastures for 6 weeks. He had driven me to my cardiologist in San Antonio 3 times in the past 2 years, sat in that waiting room each time with a paperback and a bad cup of machine coffee, and never once made me feel like an inconvenience. He was the closest thing I had to a son. He was, in a practical sense, the closest thing I had to Earl still being present. That was the version of Adrian I had known for 32 years. That was the version I was trying to hold on to at 7:30 in the morning, sitting at the kitchen table, going back and forth. At 7:45, I called Walter Briggs's office and told his assistant I needed to reschedule. I did not give a reason. She said, "Of course," and we moved it to the following Thursday. I hung up and went out to start the day. I worked through the morning the way I have always worked, slowly, because that is what the body insists on at 61, but thoroughly. I checked the water troughs along the east line. I walked the fence south of the equipment barn where one of the posts had been leaning since the last hard rain. I came back inside around 11 and heated up what was left of last night's dinner. By that point, I was angry. Whatever Nora had found or heard, she had asked me to rearrange the course of my own affairs on the basis of nothing she was willing to say out loud. I had known Adrian his entire life. I had been at the hospital the day he was born. I had taught him to drive in the east pasture when he was 14, the truck bouncing over uneven ground while he laughed too hard to keep a straight line. Whatever she thought she knew, she had not known him the way I had. That is what I told myself sitting at that table with my lunch going cold in front of me. My phone rang at 11:43, Blanco County area code, not a number I recognized. I almost let it go to voicemail. Mr. Hensley, the voice was measured and professional, the way law enforcement sounds when the information they are carrying is going to do damage and they know it. My name is Detective Craig Holloway. I'm with the Blanco County Sheriff's Office. Do you have a few minutes? I put my fork down. What he told me over the next 14 minutes rearranged everything I believed I understood about the past several months of my life. He began carefully. He told me his office had been working alongside the Texas Real Estate Commission on a fraud investigation involving a developer named Martin Doss, who operated a company called Doss Land Holdings out of Austin. Doss had a pattern. Large rural properties, aging single owners, intermediaries inserted to establish trust over time, then a push toward a transfer at below market value using a combination of forged documents and what Holloway called facilitated transfers, a careful way of describing a situation where someone close to the owner helps move paperwork through that the owner has not actually agreed to or does not fully understand. We have been watching Mr. Doss for about 17 months, Holloway said. In the past several days, information came to our attention that put your property specifically on our radar, Mr. Hensley, the Hensley property in Blanco County. We have reason to believe that documents exist, documents bearing what appears to be your signature that would have transferred significantly more than a 45% interest in your land. I was standing at the kitchen window by then. The morning light had gone flat and white. What do you mean significantly more? I said. The documents we have seen would transfer full ownership, he said, with a leaseback arrangement allowing you to remain on the property for a period not to exceed 18 months. I sat down on the kitchen floor. I do not mean I pulled out a chair. I mean my legs stopped working correctly and I sat down on the kitchen floor with my back against the base of the cabinet and the phone pressed to my ear. And I listened to Detective Holloway explain that the forged documents were intended to be executed at the bank that morning, at a 9:30 appointment I had been told was a routine formality. Mr. Hensley, I have to ask you directly. Were you aware of the full scope of what you were scheduled to sign this morning? No, I said. I understood I was signing 45%. I thought so, he said quietly. Then he told me his office had been in contact that morning with a woman identifying herself as the wife of my nephew. She had come to their office at 6:45 a.m. She had brought documents. I closed my eyes. She had found them 2 days prior, Holloway said in the home office. She had photographed everything and brought the originals that morning. Without what she brought in, his office would not have had the documentation to move when they did. I sat on the kitchen floor for a while after the call ended. The refrigerator ran. A truck passed on the county road half a mile south. I thought about Adrian at 14, laughing too hard to steer straight across the east pasture in the afternoon light. I thought about Earl. What came out in the weeks that followed came out slowly, through Holloway and through what Nora told me herself. Doss had approached Adrian 21 months earlier through a contact at a cattle auction up in Mason. He had laid out a proposal that was in its own way, almost methodical. Adrian stood to inherit less than he expected if I lived another 15 or 20 years and made different decisions along the way, better to move now. Doss would arrange a full transfer, execute it before I understood what I had signed. And once the deed moved into Doss Land Holdings, Adrian would receive a cash payment and a long-term management contract allowing him to run the property as though it were still his. I would be permitted to remain for up to 18 months before the leaseback expired. Adrian had apparently told himself this was simply a matter of taking what would have come to him eventually, that the only thing being changed was the timeline. What he had not accounted for was his wife. Nora had noticed changes in Adrian roughly a year before the morning she came to my door. A guardedness she had not seen in him before. A new quality of distance that showed up in small ways she could not initially name. A new phone he kept face down on every surface in the house, the screen always turned toward the table or the counter or the arm of the chair. Evenings he spent in the home office that ran longer than paying bills would explain. The door not fully closed, but not open either. She had noticed, and she had watched, and she had waited, the way you wait in an uncertain situation when you're still hoping the explanation you eventually find will be a different one than the one you're starting to expect. She had given it time. She had told herself there were reasonable explanations she was not yet seeing. She had watched her husband of 3 years and tried to locate the man she had married inside the behavior she was observing, and for a while she had found enough to keep herself from asking the question directly. She found the documents by accident. She had been looking for their auto insurance paperwork because the truck needed a repair, and she could not remember which drawer Adrian kept the policy in. She went through the filing cabinet in the home office one drawer at a time. The folder she pulled out was not the insurance folder. The cover sheet had the Dossland Holdings name printed at the top, with an Austin address beneath it. She stood in that office and she read what was in the folder. She spent 2 days looking for another explanation. She went through the documents more than once, more than twice. She looked for a legitimate arrangement she had misunderstood, some detail she had misread, some angle that would make this something other than what it appeared to be on the page. She looked for the version where Adrian's name on those documents meant something different than the obvious thing. She did not find it. The documents said what they said. The signature said what it said. The transfer terms said what they said. After 2 days of looking for a different answer, she had only confirmed the one she had found. What finally moved her, what took her from knowing to acting, was something she heard the night before she came to my door. She had gotten up for a glass of water sometime past midnight. Adrian was in the office with the door half open, and she heard him on the phone. She stopped in the hallway. She heard him say that it was one signature and it was done. She heard him say that the old man would not understand what he had signed until they were halfway back to Austin. She went back to bed. She lay there until 400 in the morning, going through it. Then she got up, put on her coat over what she had been sleeping in, and walked 3/10 of a mile down the gravel path in the dark to my side door. She told me all of this 2 evenings after the kitchen floor, after Adrian had been taken in for questioning that afternoon. She drove herself over alone. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and kept her hands flat on the surface the entire time, the way people do when they want you to see that they have nothing hidden. She went through it from the beginning without skipping anything and without looking away. She told me about the folder, about the 2 days, about standing in the hallway in the dark listening to her husband on the phone. I looked at her across that table. She was 29 years old. She had already filed for separation that morning. She had driven herself to the Blanco County Sheriff's Office at 6:45 a.m. with the original documents in hand and made herself a witness against her own husband before she had said a single explanatory word to me. She had given Holloway's office what they needed to move, and then she had come to my door in the gray early morning and asked me to stay home, not because she could explain it yet, but because she knew that if I walked into that bank at 9:30, it would be too late to matter what she did afterward. "What happens now?" I asked her. "For you? I mean," she said she had already called her mother up in Lubbock. She would go up there for a while. She had filed the separation paperwork that morning, before she had come to tell me any of this. I started to say her name. "Please don't," she said. Not unkindly, there was nothing sharp in it. "I'm not doing it because I'm angry at him. I mean, I'm angry. But that's not why." She stopped and seemed to choose her next words with the same care she had chosen every word that evening. "I can't stay married to someone who looks at the people who depend on him and sees a problem to manage. Does that make sense?" It did. Adrian was charged with fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud and forgery. 4 other individuals connected to Dossland Holdings were charged alongside him. Martin Doss himself was arrested in Austin on a related set of charges involving 2 additional properties in the Hill Country. I followed the legal proceedings for about 7 months before I stopped reading the updates. There is a point at which knowing more does not help you move forward. And I reached that point on a Tuesday morning looking at a case filing summary I no longer remember the specifics of. The proceedings continued without my attention. I understand they reached their conclusions. I did not need to be present for all of it. The following spring, I made 2 decisions. The first was practical and deliberate. I hired a full-time property manager, a woman named Patricia Kern, who had been running a neighboring operation for 11 years and came with a reputation that people in the county mentioned without being asked. Thorough, fair, genuinely capable with cattle and with the logistics of running land like this. We sat down together and drew up a contract, transparent terms, clearly written compensation, a defined path toward partial co-ownership if specific conditions were met over a 4-year period. Every number agreed to before anything was signed. Every term said out loud between two people who both understood what was being agreed to. I had learned something about what vague arrangements invite, and I was not going to build the same conditions again. The second decision took longer to arrive, though in the end it came to me rather than the other way around. 7 months after everything had happened, my phone rang. Blanco County area code, a number I did not have in my contacts. For 1 second before I answered just one, I thought of Holloway, and felt the specific weight of that afternoon on the kitchen floor come back to me the way it sometimes does when something catches me off guard. Then I picked up. It was Nora. She was back in Texas. She had been up in Lubbock through most of the year and had taken a position at a title company in San Antonio and was, as she described it using only that one word, rebuilding. She called to ask how I was doing. I told her the honest version, better, slowly, in the way things get better when they actually get better at all, which is not always the way you expect. She said that was enough. We talked for about 17 minutes. Nothing that would have sounded important to anyone listening from the outside, the weather, how the property was doing, a book she had read recently, something small and mildly funny that had happened at her new office that week. It was the kind of conversation that is entirely about something else, and both people in it know that, and neither of them says so because they do not need to. Some things get communicated through the fact of the conversation itself, not through anything said in it. Before she said goodbye, I told her I wanted to say something and I needed her to let me finish it without arguing. She said, "All right. What you did cost you something real." I told her, "It cost you your marriage and the plans you had made and a life you had been building. You did it for the right thing, which is larger than me, and I know that, but you did it for me too, and I'm going to carry that for the rest of my life." That is what I wanted to say. She was quiet for a moment. "You would have done the same," she said finally. "I would like to think so," I told her. "I know so," she said. And then a moment later, "Take care of yourself, Roy." I stood on the porch after the call ended and looked out at the east pasture in the early evening light. The sun was low, throwing long shadows across the grass. The cattle were moving slowly toward the water trough the way they do at that hour, unhurried, certain of themselves the way animals are when they are exactly where they are supposed to be. I have been asked in the months since all of this whether I feel like a fool for not seeing it sooner. The honest answer is yes, sometimes. There are nights when I go back through conversations with Adrian from that last year before everything came apart, and I notice things I did not notice at the time, places where a different question might have opened something, moments where I told myself what I needed to tell myself rather than looking clearly at what was in front of me. I accept it as part of it. I'm not going to pretend it does not cost me something to sit with. But what I think about more often is not that. In the moment when it mattered, when everything my father had built, and his father before him had built, was 2 hours away from being signed away at a 9:30 appointment, I had been told was a simple formality, a 29-year-old woman put on a coat over her pajamas in the dark and walked 3/10 of a mile down a gravel path to knock on a side door. She did not know how I would react. She could not tell me why she was there. Not yet. She only asked me to stay home and to trust her. And for reasons I still cannot fully account for, something in how she stood on that step in the gray of the early morning, something in the steadiness of her I did. That is the part I return to most. Not the betrayal, as real and damaging as it was. Not the phone call on the kitchen floor. Not the months of legal proceedings or the slow, uneven work of learning to trust my own judgment again. What I return to is 5:15 in the morning and a side door and a gravel path, and the fact that she came. The fact that somebody came. There's a version of that day where Nora stays in bed, where she decides it is not her problem to carry, or that she has misread what she found, or that she cannot bear what telling the truth will do to her own life. That version is real. It could have been the version that happened. I live alongside it now like a shadow version of my own history, close enough to see its shape, far enough away that it is only a shadow. I'm glad every morning when I watch that sunrise from my kitchen window that it is only a shadow and not the thing itself. Some situations are defined less by what happened and more by who was present at the moment it mattered. The outcome of a given event often depends less on the systems designed to prevent harm and more on whether a particular person, in a particular moment, chose to act rather than wait. Systems can only respond to what they are given. What they are given depends entirely on who decides to give it. That gap between what a person knows and what they choose to do with it is where most outcomes are actually decided, long before any formal process begins.